pushing the status quo and thinking about what we should be doing differently. How do we build a function? How do we make it scalable? How do we make it repeatable? And how is that experience one that's world class? We don't always have to say yes. You want champagne, but like I am in a beer budget. You want the Ferrari and I've got a Pinto. I see our candidates as customers. I see the client as a strategic stakeholder and partner for how it is that we work together. We need to get to the place where we know as much about companies' prospective customers as we do about our talent.
Welcome, Kelly. How are you?
Thanks, Chris. I'm great. Looking forward to having our discussion today.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about your trajectory, how you've made those jumps, and has there been a common link that's allowed you to build such diverse set of experience?
Interesting question. I think, like many people, when I talk to individuals about, well, how is it that you got into talent acquisition or recruiting? So many of those stories where they sort of fell into it versus being super purposeful, like coming out of either different jobs or maybe out of college. And I had a very similar experience in that I have a general liberal arts degree and background. I actually have a degree in art history and studio art. And I was spending the summer thinking about, I was going to go pursue my master's and decided not to. And, I was working at a country club teaching tennis. I was a tennis player and became friendly with one of the members who owned a regional staffing firm. And they had approached me and said, hey, we're looking for a sales rep to come in and, work for our business and selling staffing services. And I really didn't know much about it. And long story short, I met with them, ended up interviewing with them. And that's actually how I started my journey in this business and space. So that's how I got into it. But in terms of the navigation, I did start off on the staffing services side of the house, selling professional services, getting exposure to recruitment. And as I navigated that, I had the opportunity early on, and I really thank a leader that I worked for a number of years. His name's Bill Sebra. He's still in the industry. When I worked for an early stage RPO. And at that company, through a span of 5 years, because they were an early sort of growth phase, I had the opportunity was presented to me to work in a variety of different roles at that organization. So I started out as a recruiter and managing projects and working with customers. I then transitioned into actually selling the services and being out in front of customers and hearing what their issues were around recruiting and challenges. And most times when a company is calling an RPO, now it might be a little bit more strategic because the outsourcing industry in our space has matured greatly over when I first started. This was like in late to mid 90s. But just hearing, that we usually when we got called in, it was hair on fire. I'm behind in my hiring. Like, how is it? Do I accelerate it? Come and help me. And just hearing about like the challenges and how they were set up and learning and meeting with all these different companies through that sales process to then figuring out we were really small. If I was going to continue to sell successful engagements and either have fall one work or referenceable customers, we couldn't just go out and plop a bunch of recruiters into an environment and hope and pray that they delivered the way that we wanted to. So I then got involved operationally with how is that we think through from the time that we sell our products and services, like how do we build something that's productized and scalable? And so you're really architecting out the product of recruiting delivery. So from the time that you are understanding a company and what you need and how you would go out and sell and present that organization through how the actual delivery experience is that the customer would have. So like really building the process, the methodology, the tools, the enablement, how you measure, how you would go in and actually, write proposals that say what we're going to do and how we were going to show up and do it was an incredible journey for me. So I was able to be an individual contributor to going into sales role to actually architecting out how we started delivering services at scale. So I credit a lot of my early experience to that because it definitely set me in a different frame of mind when I was thinking about recruiting as a function, talent acquisition, and how to build and scale services.
It's very cool. And you said you started like a startup RPO, and then you later, I think one of your companies got acquired, or you moved into a larger enterprise RPO. Did you find that an easy transition, or what did you see as the biggest differences from moving, from kind of startup scale up into enterprise?
I would say that yes, in this early stage startup, we went from having something of 20 recruiters to 100 recruiters, and building sort of that top line revenue, and something that's scalable. I mean, I did go through a different couple of different stops before I ended up working at a larger scale enterprise RPO. So I actually did end up working at a technology vendor. So that was an interesting stop along the way, because I went there to help them sort of build out their strategy for a referral product, an employer referral product that they were building. And so I got a lot of exposure at that point in my career to more product management, leading technical teams, et cetera. And it was back in, the early, late 90s, 2000s. And guess what? It was a funded, VC funded our startup that ended up, we had to end up selling the technology assets, which, again, I was very blessed in that, unfortunately for me, I had to be in a position where I had to lay off all the employees that were there to a very small subset. So the CEO was exited, and I ended up being in that position where I was the person on that executive team at that company, to be asked to be the acting CEO as we sold the technology assets, which we ended up selling to Manpower Professional, so another staffing firm. So that was a really interesting journey, because again, like, while it was all around how it is that you build and architect and deliver services that were TA related or recruiting related to customers, I'm just wearing a different business hat. So having the responsibility of thinking about P&Ls and OpEx and those kinds of things. So that was a really interesting part of my journey, was to go there. And that was like a stop off along the way in my journey that really, while interesting and where there's some painful experiences, but making the decisions of, when you're going to pull back, or when it is that you're strategically going to say, I don't think we can ever make our top line revenue, and therefore we're going to recommend to the board and the VCs that we should sell the technology assets versus continuing to just make a go at it, was a really interesting experience early in my career.
It's so interesting. I think for a lot of people in talent and recruiting, it seems like a massive jump from, doing what most people are doing to then going and selling products and services, architecting that process, managing technical teams. And um, did those opportunities, you mentioned you had a great leader who, opened up some of those opportunities for you, but were you actively kind of seeking those different opportunities out, or did they just present themselves through this like a natural, um, you know, c- I guess path that you were following? Um, yeah, I'm just really interested in how you move from one to the other.
I think I think that, like, one of my superpowers over time, and I've discovered it through my own self journey, but also taking multitude of assessments, whether it's Gallup or other things like that. But I do have the knack of, if there's a puzzle that needs to be put together and there's a lot of pieces, I can very quickly see how those pieces and parts fit together, and sort of see the end state, vision that we're trying to, or the solve that we're trying to get to. I think in those environments, I was like always really dissatisfied a little bit with the status quo. Like, we could be better, or we could be moving ahead, or how would we problem solve? And so I either would, raise my hand to do the hard task and say, I'll help, I'll jump in and do it. But I also was one to raise, kind of pushing the status quo and thinking about what we should be doing differently. So I think it was a little bit of both. But it was definitely like, I was leading in and taking risks and being prepared to, maybe work in a little bit of a stressful, time compressed environment, because it was, where's the fire today, or what's the problem du jour, and I was always willing to raise my hand to go and work in that, which didn't always work, but the experience that I got volunteering to be in those sort of firefighter modes, was again like a really good to my overall learning journey. And then having the leaders who were willing to lean in and take the risk. Because in many of those cases, I may have been like, might have been like my first at bat with some of those roles, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's really cool. And having all of that diverse experience, how has that influenced, now you're in TA leadership, how do you think that's influenced the work that you do now? Is there anything that kind of stands out?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think for me, it's my ability to be able to show up with a business and have dialogue with business leaders or with, an executive team and really understand the business problems and be able to translate what it is that we are trying to do from a TA perspective and how to solve for those. Because it's yes, our reason for being as a TA function is to make sure that we are delivering to the scope, like whatever the business headcount target and plan is. But we all know that there's so much more that goes into the function. Um, we're always pulling the lever of, is it, how fast can we do it? So speed, cost, efficiency, diversity, experience. How do we build a function? How do we make it scalable? How do we make it repeatable? And how is that experience one that's world class to the customers who deliver, like they're experiencing it, to the stakeholders that are using, the actual quote unquote services and the candidates that are working in those processes. So I think I'm bringing, the way I talk about myself is that I feel like I'm a business executive that happens to have like extreme domain knowledge and expertise in talent acquisition. So I think, my ability and I feel very fortunate to have had the experience that I've had working in these different roles, where I'm a business leader first and a talent acquisition leader second.
Uh-huh. How do you think that shows up in, how you make decisions, how you work and lead talent acquisition? Do you think there's a difference between being the other way around, being TA first, business second?
I mean, I think, it's kind of cliche, but I'm definitely I'm a leader that's data driven. I'm going to influence decision making by using, data. I'm going to, look to see, I need to figure out what my point of view is and what it is that I'm doing with a particular function. Is I've got to go in to seek to understand like what's the current state of the function. And is that through a cost lens? Is that through efficiency lens? Is that through like just general delivery results? Are we getting done like what it is that we were supposed to be getting done in the first place? And then, really mapping out and having, how do you set priorities for a function? Like, how is it beyond just delivering, again, the headcount that the business needs? What does that multi-year journey look like? And what is it that you're trying to build the organization to look like in future state? So I take I almost take like a product management approach, which is I'm building out a multi-year roadmap and I'm looking at like cost implications, the ability to deliver and how quickly, and what the impact will be of doing those things. I think the other thing that's super important for TA leaders is all TA leaders are faced with, there's always a little element of flying the airplane while, fixing it while you're flying it. And, understanding how much change the organization is able and willing to digest in and over what time period, and not just the TA organization, but the business and the hiring organization. Trying to deploy a new ATS, or I'm going to implement a CRM, or I want to roll out a new assessment program. While those things on paper seem to be very rudimentary, fundamental things that we do in TA, don't underestimate the amount of time, energy, and effort it takes to bring people along on the journey and to, change the behaviorals. And sometimes it's a cultural shift too, and how people want to operate and work together.
Talentful provides flexible recruiting solutions to the world's most ambitious companies. Are you thinking about ways to add flexibility to your talent function? With recent market volatility and hiring set to return to growth mode in the near future, there's never been a better time to choose the right partner to help you scale. Talentful's embedded sourcing, recruiting, coordination, and talent advisory services have been trusted by the world's leading brands. Companies such as Atlassian, Microsoft, Expedia, Pinterest, Waymo, and more. Whether you're hiring across engineering, go-to-market, or G&A, Talentful has got you covered. To find out how Talentful can help you, visit talentful.com.
That's interesting. Is it kind of case by case in terms of like the capacity of the business at that time, the size of the business, the complexity? Is it you've got kind of a general rule that's no more than once a quarter we do an implementation or something like that? How do you I guess take those things into consideration? What do you look at when you're looking at that change limit?
I mean, I don't know that there's like a perfectly thought out matrix. Like, here's the playbook for me where I look at that. But each scenario can be a little different, but it could be, you got to look at the business environment and conditions. And the timing too. Like, do I want to, from a very basic level, am I trying to roll out a lot of change within, like, for example, a large go-to-market sales organization when it's an end of quarter? Probably not. So there's things around time. There's also, are we in a situation where like we're behind and like the hiring velocity is massive and we're just every day expending a ton of energy just to get it done? It's really hard to put more pressure into a system that already is under a lot of pressure. So sometimes you just have to look at timing and window and also make hard decisions, which is, okay, for my work back plan, it looks like I'm going to be able to roll out this, solution. I want to get it in the calendar year and like December. December can be a great time or a terrible time because it's hiring slowing down. It's our business like able to do it. It's like meaning our TA function is the business, from a timing perspective, is that a good time or are people going to be checked out on vacation? So these are really simple things, but you have to look at, what's going on in the business and also not just our own roadmap. So you have to look at in its entirety from an HR, human capital, people organization, what's the collective roadmap and what else is the business going to be asked to do in terms of training, change management, in terms like they've got their day jobs, but what else in the system are they being asked to do? And making sure that you're not working like this is just what I'm doing in my function, but what's happening across that's going to impact not only my own team members, but the other sort of end users that we're asking to either do work or change some sort of behavior. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you see that a lot where, especially when organizations become big, siloed, people don't know what everyone else is doing or, how they're going to be impacted by change, implementation, and how their time's going to get sucked up. And everyone just frantically running around doing a little of a lot of a little, yeah. Oh, a little of a lot, whichever way around it is. And one of the things that you was just talking about is how important it is to be kind of a business leader, be in the business and not just in TA. I think, some of the times TA leaders find themselves, just in this frantic situation where they're trying to hit the headcount goal. They've got a ton of pressure on them and their teams. So just get those numbers in, like you were saying, especially over the last 18 months, post-COVID, it's been pretty crazy. What recommendations would you give to, talent leaders that want to take that step in and become more well-rounded as a business leader? But at the moment, they feel very kind of constrained in TA. Is there any kind of small steps or things that they can do inside the organization that you'd recommend?
I mean, some of the things that I just heard you mentioned were getting headcount. Like did I hear you say that? Like TA is always in this basic struggle of, I'm just trying to understand what the business wants, right? Because for the TA function to be enabled to actually have an enterprise TA strategy, there's a little bit of the maturity on the business side that needs to be there. And I'm not talking about sophisticated workforce planning. We could just talk about rudimentary headcount planning and the cycle of business. And that never seems, no matter how, and I've worked in a lot of different companies, even exposure to a lot of companies, big name companies in the Fortune 200. And there always seems to be like a gas on, gas off thing that we go through in our function. But I'm just going to go back to like data. they want to understand, well, why do you need this much headcount, or how productive is your organization, and why does it look like that? I think you got to have, I'm not saying that the individual leader needs to do it, but having people on your team that have the capability to do forecasting and scenario modeling and understanding, what is your current productivity and what does it take to actually deliver to the organization, so you can make the business case to actually show what is needed to deliver. So I'm going to answer that kind of portion of the question from that perspective. So I think that's really important, because so many times I don't think that we're equipped with the information that we need from a data perspective to readily influence. And I can tell you, even just on my own journey here, sometimes the data isn't there, either through systems deployment workflow, I don't have trends data because we don't even have the ability to do it. You have to start from the very basics. So my recommendation always is start with what it is that you think that you want to have from a KPI or metrics framework, and how you're going to operationally manage your business, how you manage and run your own business, and how it is that you are going to talk about that with the business. What are the key data points and why that you're going to bring to them, and then work back on how to recreate that. And sometimes if it has to be manual's better than nothing, which I know is painful, but I think that helps to establish the credibility with the business is just being read in. But I think in terms of, well, where could I go potentially as a TA professional, especially maybe if I've started as a recruiter and I've grown into being a people manager and my scope and remit continues to expand, I would say, seek out a mentor in the current business environment that you're in that is a finance leader, and work with them to get their perspective and what would they look for, and getting some basic, whether it's understanding your general ledger or your OpEx or those things. I would, seek out over time having a mentor that's from finance, having a mentor that is from products, or because from a product management perspective, we really are building a set of services that can be productized that we want to continue to scale. And how, if you take a product management mindset and work back from the customer to architect out how it is that you're going to deliver services, I think that's also a recommendation, because you can learn a lot. They can reference materials, books, training, other things. I don't think that necessarily, and no knock on SHRM or anything else, I don't know that going to continue to work on, TA or get my certifications is necessarily going to round us out as TA leaders from, having other, being strong in other areas of the business. So that would be my recommendation.
That's really interesting. I really like the idea of finding a mentor in kind of a business function like finance. I can imagine how that would be really useful. And, I guess one of the things from your background that you've been heavily involved in is, building, strategies and programs of work or transformation programs in organizations. And I think in TA, there's always a lot of talk about, strategy, and very rarely do you see it executed well. Is there kind of, any key mistakes that you think people make when they're building strategies and fail to execute on them properly?
I do believe it all goes into how much thoughtfulness is put into planning. So, and what I mean by that is, you can have a group of leaders. I could, you look at the business strategy and you're like, okay, well, this is our overall business strategy that we're going to map our TA function to. So what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And again, it's rudimentary. It could be, delivering headcount. But are we trying to be more efficient? Are we trying to be faster? Are we trying to be, more cost effective? Are we trying to impact experience, et cetera? And you can come up with a plan. I want to, over X amount of time, increase my productivity, or I want to take my cost of hire down from X to Y. And you can aspirationally have those things, but then you have to get very specific about what are the actual things that we are going to do that are going to impact that. And in what level of impact do we think that we would have? And I think one of the things it brings me to another point. The other high recommendation is all around project management. Because I think, having that program and project management capability and discipline's critical, because the ability to take a strategy and translate that into a plan that has actual components of what it is that you're trying to accomplish over X period of time, you have to have single-threaded leaders for those particular projects or initiatives. There needs to be time bound. Like, what is it that we think we're going to accomplish by when? What is the business impact that we're looking to deliver? That's measurable. So you have a project, you have the impact, you are able to measure, and you have to have a routine in which you inspect progress. So many times I see aspirational things that are like, we're going to try to do X, and that's what they've put in their plan. And there is nothing tied to watching progress, measuring progress. And who is it that you are holding accountable for making that needle move? So you have to have people that own it, and you have to have a space in which leaders can come together to really inspect the progress against those things. So, it goes a little bit back to some of the learnings that I had at my former employee at Amazon, but the concept of actually having people that own something, I've seen the mistake of, well, Sue and Mary and Jane are working on this project. I was like, well, at the end of the day, who is accountable for whether the project is on time or it fails or is a success? So then that person owns it. They're accountable for it. It's part of their goals. And that's how you drive activity. And as you come together and you look at why isn't on time, then you can have a discussion about, well, what are the blockers, or, how is it that we can remove those things to keep, progress moving forward. So it's taking that strategy and articulating that into a clear plan with projects, deliverables, milestones, and a way to actually, check on whether or not those things are happening in the time frame that we expected them to happen. It sounds basic, but the amount of times that I see that doesn't happen, it's often.
Having gone through that process and I guess finding your own way of building strategies, do you have a recommendation for how many things people are focused on, like changing at once? Or, let's say, it's like decrease time to hire, decrease cost per hire. There's only so many things you can maybe do a great job at. Do you have any kind of framework like that or recommendations?
I think that's the other thing. That's like we sign up for too much stuff, right? So do you want to get 3 things? Do you want to get 3 things done really, really well and knock them out of the park, or get like none of 15 things that you signed up for? I mean, I don't think it's about the number of things. It's about going back to that discussion we were having earlier around what is the organizational capacity to be able to take on what it is that we might want to deliver. So that you got to look through that lens and the timing of that. You have to look at the actual capacity that it's going to take from a resource perspective to do those things. And so you can't just sign up for the things. You got to look at what it is, the thing that we want to do. Then you have to, go through, like, what's the level of effort? What's the cost? And those are some of the trade-off decisions that one would have to make. And I guess I'm the leader of my function, but I'm bringing my team together to come up with what we think those priorities are across the portfolio. And then we have to roll up our sleeves and have discussions around why is that as a priority? Like, what do we think that's going to, like, what do we think that the business impact would be delivered? There's a series of trade-offs that we have to make as business leaders all the time. So you have to, why one project and not another? And so it's a matter of like making sure that it's not too much. And if we feel that it is too much, you have to give yourself space on that sort of operational routine. Like, I'm a huge fan of, you have to kind of establish a framework for like meetings. Like, there's a lot of meetings, right? But I feel pretty passionately about Like if I'm going to be meeting with my team, like what do I do at my staff meetings? What am I doing at managers meetings? And what am I doing at other meetings when we're going to be doing this sort of like, hey, how are we doing? Like operational meetings, and establishing and being really clear about what they are, when you're going to have them and the cadence of them, sets it up to having an actual routine and an expectation. But if there's like, if you sign up for, if something else also flies in, like there's always some crisis du jour that seems to be happening. Do you always reserve bandwidth for crisis du jour into your organization, or it's the never-ending cycle of I just added 3 more things to the list, but I didn't take something else off. So it's this constant balance of what are we prioritizing and being laser focused on those things, and then being willing to let go of some of the things you wanted to do to begin with, and collectively doing that. Because I've also seen that, which is like, we just signed up for 10 more things, but we didn't take anything off of our plate. That's just setting us up to everybody up to fail and be burnt out.
Absolutely. I was actually talking to one of my leaders, and she was saying how same thing. She just agreed to a bunch of stuff, but then hadn't taken anything off. And one of the realizations that is in such a fast growing business, you need to set yourself some buffer time. 10% of your week should be left free for this stuff that comes in ad hoc out of the blue. That's really important. Do you think that this shift to remote work has made executing on strategies and really driving stuff forwards more difficult, or is it just a different approach?
I mean, I think the way in which we work and maybe the tools and how we collaborate might have changed a bit. But I have to say my personal experience, which hasn't been 100% in pandemic in this current organization, it's been mixed between a previous and this organization. Like I've had experiences where I have onboarded new senior leaders to my team completely virtual and never met them, and it didn't impact how it is that we got things done.
Yeah, I guess it all goes back to what you were saying before, that clear guide of what everyone's responsible for, ownership. And that's the same whether you're in person or not, right? That's normally what creates a lot of the friction and things not getting done and getting dropped between cracks. Maybe less about being actually in person. Awesome.
That's been my experience. I think the other thing too that I thought of in one of the questions that you asked, I also feel that sometimes we in TA feel like, because the business is somewhat, and this is controversial, I don't know that I actually see them as customers. I see our candidates as customers. I see the client as a strategic stakeholder and partner for how it is that we work together to create a great experience for that candidate and put us in a position where we're actually having the information we need to make good selection of the talent that we're hiring. And I think there's this age-old behavior, which is, well, if my hiring manager is happy and the business is happy, that it's good. Well, it could be like the business is happy, but we're doing a bunch of stuff that's like foolish and wasting our time, and things that we shouldn't be doing. I think we have to put ourselves in a situation where, we are the subject matter experts, that we are, helping to build and architect the solutions, and that we're prescribing the process versus being order takers. And that we as leaders can be in the room, and, we don't always have to say yes. I think it's, we have to push back on the time, or I have, especially in the environment that I'm in, hiring managers always want different cuts of data, or like, I'd really love to be able to see these trends data. There's always there's no lack of an appetite for data from our hiring teams. You just have to sometimes it's well, it's the adage that I use is you have you want champagne, but I am in a beer budget. You want the Ferrari and I've got a Pinto. But you can explain to them. You can explain to them, this is the journey. I aspire to get to XYZ, but in the current state, here's our blockers, and this is what I'm able to do. I think there's so much that we just feel compelled to say that we have to do it. And yes. So it's a little bit of pushing back and setting expectations so that you're not constantly in this reacting, getting asked all the time for all these different things du jour, which is, I think, makes our our business that we run frenetic. And that is like a consistent theme and thread that I see across multiple TA organizations that I've either exposed to or worked with, is this constant like asking either the managers or the recruiters for things that aren't ready, that then they're like, it's fire drilling. I call it, I'm doing gymnastics to try to get to one place to the next. And how is it that we actually stop that so that we can go on and have a regular business that we're running and educate them and bring them along on the journey of like, this is where we are. And like it's okay to say where we are if it's somewhat broken, but at least they know it's somewhat broken, or that we have these areas of opportunity, but that we're, aspiring to get to X, Y, Z by when. But I think it's super important to set that across all levels, whether it's at, the VP and the exec level or the next levels down, so that you don't get yourself into this constant, I'm on my heels reacting to the multiple, random requests du jour.
I agree with you about this frenetic kind of pace that happens in recruiting functions, and I've wondered why that is. Do you think it's because a lot of what recruiting teams do is hidden, and a lot of the work that we do, and maybe I still get surprised at how little hiring managers know about what happens behind the scenes in recruiting, and how we actually get that candidate to turn up to an interview and get an offer, and what happens all behind the scenes. Do you think that that's why there's just not enough visibility? So there's this idea that there's lots of time and people have a lot of bandwidth, or what do you think the reason is?
Yeah, I think in so many cases it starts with, it's the dynamic of the business climate. It's the dynamic and the maturity of the businesses that we support. Like, headcount planning, workforce planning, the ability for us to have an enterprise strategy where it's thoughtful and proactive and planful is challenging. Like half the time we end up responding to the business is reorging, they're changing their priorities. And so a lot of times we are on our heels responding and reacting to that. So I do think there's an element of a lack of overall maturity in general around maturity and workforce planning practices. And having a line of sight of like, what is it that we think we're to be hiring? And you also think about this, what we've been experiencing in the last 24 months plus, the great reshuffle, resignation, whatever we want to call it. From a staffing perspective, our team is resourced based off assumptions of X% of attrition rates. And depending on how large of a business it is that you're supporting, a 10 to 20% jump, like a 10% jump on a base of like a 20,000 person head count, like 10% of 20,000, that's a lot of more heads that you need to hire that you're certainly not staffed to do. So I think that there's an element there. But I find that, whether or not the TA is always TA functions are always in some sort of bit of maturity, which is how established are your processes? Is tech enabled to deliver on those processes? Tooling, sophistication of sourcing models. There's so many different variables that make up why how mature the function is, how complex the function is. But at the end of the day, the hiring managers want to be able to fill their headcount. And if we don't have a lack of sophistication, like we're this, it's very, very few times where we're actually have a proactive plan that's in front of us that says what we're going to hire that actually remains true for more than a month, it seems. I mean, it's just, we're constantly reacting to dynamics.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think the value of talent and how it impacts businesses is becoming more and more prevalent. And hopefully with that and with people that are becoming business leaders as well as just TA leaders, that can shift this conversation to be, more proactive and have a seat at the table and make sure the business are thinking about this and is front of mind. So that's a future that sounds really great. And I could definitely talk to you about this forever. But I'm really conscious of your time. And I wanted to wrap up with one more question. I think I might know the answer based on what we've been speaking about, but what are you most excited about in talent acquisition and the future of TA at the moment?
I mean, right now, we've been in like this knowledge economy for such a long time, which you've pointed to. Like we are in like the value of an organization right now in the books is a lot of it is intangible. It's not like the manufacturing days when it was assets. It's like it's our intellectual property, which is talent, right? So that puts us in a really interesting place to be and will continue to be. I also think with like the changing technology landscape, even within our own ability to purchase products and tech in a TA function to help us to really automate. There's been like hype around the replacement of the recruiter and how automation is going to somehow negate the necessity of our function, which I don't believe to be true. I'm really interested in seeing how we as a function continue to raise our game in the level of sophistication around passive sourcing, around building out real marketing functions for how we connect with like prospective candidates. And how is it that the sort of goal for a TA function is be like, I have a ready pipeline that when my hiring manager wants X person, then I magically have this qualified, amazing person. And we're not there yet, but I think through, the ability to leverage technology and the ability to build, data warehouse lakes of, talent that's our prospective talent and getting to know who we want to hire in the future and becoming more of think about what a marketing function does for a sales function. Like they know everything. Think about what they know about their customer and their prospective customers. A lot. We need to get to the place where we know as much about our, company's prospective customers as we do about our talent. And I think if we can translate that and operate like that, it would be a game changer. And yeah, we need to have the workforce strategy and the workforce planning stuff and whatnot. But for us to really understand the talent that's out there, how to engage with them earlier on and actually build ready pipelines, it's there. We just need to execute on how we design an organization to support something like that and leverage the technology that's continuing to be advanced in that space for us to be able to do it. So that coupled with, all the supply side data and talent intelligence and market intelligence is a really powerful asset. So I'm interested in seeing where that goes and continues to mature in our space.
Awesome. I'm inspired. I need to go and do some recruiting now. So thanks a lot, Kelly. It's been really great to chat to you. And I'm sure the listeners will
Thanks for
love
having
that.
me.
Thank you.